Chapter 1. The Ambush at Dinner. I am Marissa Cole. And the morning my family arrived with a moving truck to claim my lake house. I met them at the gate with a manila folder and a plan. Permits stamped. A 9-month demolition set for 7. Smart locks warning trespass. My veteran neighbor saying you cannot force your way in. Officers confirming the law while my sister dumped furniture on my lawn. I called an auction truck and sent every dollar to Denver foster youth. Then my father played his last card and threatened the will. I answered the way I rebuilt this place. With boundaries that hold. I had spent 6 years teaching the lake house to breathe again. When I first drove up the dirt road in 2017, the place sagged under the weight of neglect. Cedar boards silvered by wind and sun, windows clouded with dust, pipes that groaned when the water finally ran. I signed the papers anyway for $425,000 and promised the hill and the water that I would be patient. After the divorce in 2018, I kept that promise. I learned the rhythm of contractors and permits, of sanding and sealing, of waking before dawn to drive from Denver to Boulder County with a thermos of coffee and a trunk full of tools. Little by little, I put $110,000 of my own money into new joists, a standing seam roof, double-pane windows, a kitchen that could hold a whole life. The house stopped being a project and became my safe place. I could hear the wind in the pines and know I had built a shelter that would not tilt under someone else's needs. On Sunday nights, we gathered at my parents' place in South Denver. It was a ritual as old as the chipped casserole dish Elaine swore made the only proper green beans. Charles poured wine and pretended not to notice that he was pouring more for himself than anyone else. Vanessa arrived late and loud, the kids trailing behind like a bright and tired parade. Mark carrying a bag of groceries as if that would balance something unseen between them. I parked on the street because the driveway was full of bikes and scooters, then stood on the porch for one deep breath before I went in. The living room smelled like rosemary and lemon and the furniture I had grown up with. A framed photo from a long ago Christmas leaned crooked on the mantel where a nail refused to hold anything straight. Ethan barreled into me and wrapped his arms around my waist. Lily asked if I brought the lemon cookies. I told her I would bake next time. Caleb climbed onto the couch and bounced until Elaine told him to use his inside legs. It was always like this, a swirl of affection and noise, and if I kept my expectations small, I could enjoy it. We settled around the table. Charles began with a short grace that sounded more like a closing argument than a prayer. He thanked the Lord for family and stability, and then for the roast that had cost far too much this week. Elaine laughed in a way that carried a warning. I passed the potatoes, said the usual things about work. A client wanted oak but could afford ash. A supplier had sent the wrong tile. Vanessa asked if I had any spare fabric remnants for a classroom craft. I said I would look. There was the gentle clatter of forks for a while. Mark cleared his throat and did not speak. The children argued in whispers about who would get the room with the view if they lived near a lake. Elaine told them to stop fantasizing and eat. Vanessa smiled at me with the kind of brightness that always meant my boundaries were about to be tested. She talked about traffic and the price of strawberries and how the principal at the charter school still had not renewed enough positions for fall. She mentioned the tiny quake last year and how some houses in their neighborhood had shifted. Mark stared at his plate. I watched the steam rise from the roast and tried to guess the moment the air would change. It changed when Vanessa set down her fork and folded her hands. The room got very quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant thump of Caleb's feet under the table. She said they had been thinking about the lake house and how perfect it would be for the kids, how fresh air and space would help them settle after such a tough year, how the drive to Boulder County was really not that bad if you left early, how family should look out for family. Charles nodded as if he had already reviewed the terms. Elaine said that children need roots, and what better place than a lake? Mark shifted in his chair, then stilled. Vanessa kept going. She said next week would be best. She said the kids had already picked their rooms. She said she knew I would say yes because I always did. For a second, I could not tell if I had heard correctly. My mind did the odd thing where it tried to fit her words into shapes that did not hurt. I looked at Ethan, who had made a sail from his napkin. I looked at Lily, who watched me the way children watch weather. I looked at Caleb, who had bitten the crust off his bread and left the soft center in a neat square. I looked at my hands and realized I was still holding the serving spoon. I set the spoon down and reached for my water. The condensation had made a small ring on the table, pale against the varnish. I traced it with my finger the way I used to trace lakes on maps when I was a child, wondering what it would feel like to stand in a place that had its own horizon. I reminded myself to breathe in a way that did not look like I was reminding myself to breathe. Vanessa started listing which rooms the children had chosen. Ethan wanted the one with the slanted ceiling. Lily wanted the one with the window seat. Caleb wanted the one that felt like a treehouse, even though I had never called any of the rooms that. Elaine suggested bunk beds and a reading corner. Charles said we could talk about sharing utilities and common expenses and that it would be good practice for real-life cooperation. He smiled at me with the calm of a man who believes he is giving sound counsel. I heard my own pulse. It sounded like a faraway hammer tapping a nail that will not go in. I thought of the mornings at the lake when mist hangs just above the water and the only other sound is a mourning dove calling from the pines. I thought of nights I had slept on the floor because the drywall dust was too thick on the bed. Of the time the new roof went on and the crew leader gave me a thumbs up and I felt taller than the ridgeline. I thought of how the house had become the place where I learned the difference between generosity and surrender. Elaine said it would be a relief for me too, having people around, not being alone so much. She said that grief can look like independence sometimes. She meant it kindly, which made it worse. Charles tapped the table twice with his ring and said there would be ground rules, that we would respect my work schedules, that no one expected me to give up my studio in Denver. He spoke the way he used to when he drafted settlement terms, as if language could prevent damage. Mark finally said it might be a tight squeeze next week and maybe we should look at timing. Vanessa cut him off without looking at him. The children wriggled with excitement. Ethan asked if there would be a place to fish. Lily asked if she could plant wildflowers. Caleb said he wanted a tree swing as big as the sky. I could feel the old script trying to load. The one in which I smile and say of course and then work harder to make room for everyone else. I could hear the older version of me reasoning that it was only for a while, that family emergencies count more than personal plans, that saying no would mark me as cold. I pictured myself moving my tools into the shed, rolling up rugs, locking away the fragile things. I saw Vanessa hosting barbecues on the deck I had sanded by hand, laughing at a volume that would frighten the birds. The water in my glass was cold. I wrapped my fingers around it and let the chill climb into my palm. I said nothing. I knew what was in my car. The manila folder tucked into the side pocket, the schedule Miguel had printed with dates and stages and demolition notes, the permit copies Rachel had said to keep close. I knew that tomorrow morning the crew would arrive at the lake with the container and the blue tarps and the saws and the ladders, and the house would begin its next transformation. I also knew that if I spoke too soon, if I argued now, the conversation would become about tone and not about facts. The room waited. Vanessa beamed as if she had handed me a gift. Elaine watched my face the way a nurse watches a monitor. Charles leaned back as if the decision had been settled. Mark looked at the children, then at his hands. I lifted the glass and took a long drink. The water tasted like lemon and ice. My hand did not shake. I set the glass down, careful to place it on the ring I had already made so there would not be two. The table was quiet except for the soft scrape of a fork against a plate somewhere near the end. I folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate. I held my breath for the length of a heartbeat, then let it go. I kept my eyes on the table. My silence did not mean agreement and it did not mean confusion. It meant that for once I would choose the timing and the terms. I let the quiet widen, steady and deliberate, while the waves that had built inside me settled into something that felt like resolve. Chapter 2. History of Taking. I lifted my eyes and saw the room tilt toward Vanessa again, a small shift at first, then the familiar lean that had followed us since childhood. Elaine brushed crumbs from the table and announced that children needed stability. Charles cleared his throat and said a plan made in good faith deserves support. Vanessa straightened, reached into her tote, and pulled out a stack of papers held together with a binder clip. She slid the stack toward the middle with the easy confidence of someone who expects everyone else to rearrange their lives around hers. She said the house in Denver had a foundation issue after that tremor last year. a hairline fissure along the south wall, doors that no longer closed, tile that cracked in a neat diagonal across the kitchen. She said an engineer had looked at it, that the report used words like settlement and structural risk, that a contractor warned them not to stay until a full pier system was installed. She tapped a page and told us the cost would be astronomical. She said the kids had been scared when the doors pinched, that Caleb cried when the bathroom door would not open, and Mark had to shove his shoulder into it. She said no one could expect 3 children to live with that kind of stress. Charles nodded in the measured way he used with clients, saying that safety trumps convenience. He said family can be a bridge in a crisis. Elaine pressed a hand to her chest and reminded everyone that life happens in waves, and that we were lucky to have a lake house so close, a blessing that should be shared. Mark sat very still and kept his eyes on the edge of his plate. I reached for the papers. The engineer letter was on neat letterhead from a firm in Lakewood. It described minor seismic activity in 2022, hairline cracks near window headers, slight differential settlement near the southeast corner. The language was cautious, the kind that invites second opinions and careful timelines. There was a contractor estimate that treated every hypothetical as a certainty. There was also a list of accommodations Vanessa had already allocated in my house, written in the margins in a looping hand: bunk beds, a homework table, a shoe rack by the back door. Each note pulled a small thread of anger loose in me. Elaine reminded me of the time she had slept on a couch while her parents fixed their roof, as if that memory were a transferable credential. Charles said that this is what people mean by the phrase pull together. He said it with the same tone he used when he moved money around for a living and called it strategy. Vanessa looked as if she had won a prize and did not yet know how to carry it. The room blurred slightly at the edges, and I slipped back to a summer when we were children. Vanessa wanted the blue dress with the satin ribbon. I had worn it the year before, careful not to stain it at the church picnic, careful to let the ribbon dry straight. Elaine said a dress is happier when it gets to be worn twice, then handed it to Vanessa and told me I looked lovely in yellow. Later, there was the scholarship breakfast when Charles smiled at the dean and introduced Vanessa first. Then told me that a family has to think like a unit. He said the wedding fund would set Vanessa on a strong path, that I was practical and would understand. My stomach had ached that day like I had swallowed a cold stone. I took on more shifts at the drafting lab and learned to drink coffee without milk. Back in the dining room, Vanessa talked about the kids. Ethan needed a quiet corner for his science projects. Lily needed a sunny window for her drawings. Caleb needed space to run where no one would complain. She listed these as if she were reciting medical instructions. Elaine nodded along. Charles tapped his ring again, a staccato metronome underlining the plan. He asked how we could make the transition smooth. He said we should put temporary rules in place now, that we would revisit them later. He glanced at me, reassuring and firm, like a judge who already knows the sentence. Mark finally spoke. He said it might be better to check another engineer and see if there was a temporary stabilization option. Vanessa did not look at him. She said that anything temporary would stress the kids. That uncertainty would be worse than moving once. She said the lake house was ready. She said it like a verdict. I placed the papers back on the table, straightened the edges so they lined up with the wood grain. My voice, when I found it, sounded calm in my own ears. I said I was sorry to hear the house had cracked. I said foundation work is expensive and slow. I said I understood that their week had been hard. Vanessa blinked as if I had told her something irrelevant. Elaine leaned toward me and softened her voice. She said this is exactly why God keeps families close. She told me I had always been so strong, that independence is admirable, that life is not meant to be lived alone. She said the children would fill that quiet space with laughter. She said it would be good for me. She said I would see. Charles set his glass down and folded his hands. He said we could handle utilities in thirds, that I would not be financially burdened, that boundaries would be respected. He used the word respected as if saying it made it true. He said we would protect my work hours, that no one would touch my tools. He said that of course I would keep the biggest bedroom because I had purchased the home. He smiled at the legal neatness of it. I watched Mark's jaw tighten. He rubbed a thumb along a water ring like he could erase it. He said nothing else. The kids whispered about hammocks and kayaks, little fantasies that made my chest ache because they were innocent, and also because they were being used as leverage without their knowledge. I stood to take the empty salad bowl to the sink. The kitchen window looked west, and the sky was turning that thin violet that comes right before night. I ran water, cold first, then warmer, and let the bowl sit beneath it. My reflection wavered on the glass, then steadied. I remembered the day I drove to Boulder County in a sleet storm because the roofers said they could squeeze me in before another system moved through. I remembered crawling along Highway 36 while semis hissed past, my hands tight on the wheel, and the feeling when I pulled into the drive and saw the tarps already up. It had felt like winning a small war. Elaine came to my shoulder and said she hoped I was not offended. She said this is not a demand. She said this is a chance for us to be a team. I dried the bowl with a towel that still smelled like the lemon oil she uses on the cabinets. I told her I heard what she was asking. I kept my tone even. She rested her hand on my arm for a beat too long and then went back to the table. When I returned, Vanessa had repositioned the papers closer to my chair. She said she had already talked to a moving company. She said availability was tight. She said next week made the most sense. She said she had told the kids. She looked at me and waited for the capitulation that used to live just behind my teeth. I set my palm on the tabletop and felt the small grooves where years of plates had left their scars. I was aware of my age and my work and the house that had healed me in a way people rarely do. I was aware of the way my father loved order more than fairness, and the way my mother loved harmony more than honesty, and the way my sister loved being saved. I was aware that love can be real and still dangerous when it refuses to learn. Mark pushed his chair back an inch. He said we could take a breath and look at options. Vanessa told him not to confuse the children with mixed messages. Ethan asked if there were fish in winter. Lily asked about a reading nook. Caleb asked if frogs sleep. I reached for my napkin again and unfolded it just to refold it. My voice stayed level when I spoke. I said that their engineer might be right, that a second opinion could confirm it, that waiting 1 week will not make a cracked wall whole. Elaine smiled as if I had agreed to something. Charles said he was glad we were on the same page. Vanessa exhaled like a runner who sees the finish line. I felt the old ache in my stomach. But this time it sat beside something steadier. The past tried to lay its template over the present, and the lines did not match. The day I watched the new joists go in at the lake. Miguel had said that when the support is right, the rest of the structure stops complaining. I looked at the children and pictured them splashing on the shoreline someday as guests, not as squatters in a story I did not write. I looked at Mark and wondered when he had last been heard. I looked at my parents and saw two people who had built a family with the tools they understood, then kept using those tools long after the job had changed. I placed my napkin on the plate and sat back. I told Vanessa she could leave the engineer packet with me. She slid it over as if passing a baton. I tucked it under my hand and felt the weight of it. I said we should finish dinner while it was still warm. No one argued. Forks lifted again, clinked, settled. Conversation moved to soccer schedules and a bake sale at church and whether the late frost would nip the lilacs. Under the edge of my chair, my bag waited, the manila folder inside quiet and ready. The thought of it steadied me. I listened to the small sounds of my family doing what families do, filling the room with ordinary noise. And I let the shape of the night move forward on its own momentum until it reached a place where ending the meal felt polite. Chapter 3. The Manila Folder. I gathered the plates and carried them to the sink, let the water run, and listened to the soft hush of the faucet until the chatter behind me thinned. When I turned back, Elaine was stacking dessert plates we would not need. Charles was checking his phone as if a calendar could bless the plan, and Vanessa was watching me with the bright expectancy of someone sure the world would pivot her way. I walked to my chair, reached down to my bag, and slid out the manila folder that had been waiting like a steady pulse. I laid it on the table and set my palm on top of it so the papers would not fan open with the draft from the vent. The room narrowed to the rectangle of cardstock in front of me. I could feel each eye in the room trying to read its thickness. I lifted the cover and turned the first page so the contents faced them. Contracts with Miguel Torres Construction. city and county permits with embossed seals, a demolition schedule broken down by week, then day, then morning and afternoon, product orders with delivery windows already confirmed, copies of payments and receipts. Vanessa let out a small sound that might have been a laugh if it had not been so thin. I spoke clearly and slowly so the words would not tangle. Tomorrow morning, the crew begins full interior tear-out, walls down to studs, kitchen and baths gutted, flooring removed. There will be no rooms to move into. Elaine pressed her fingers to her mouth. Charles leaned forward, the light catching his glasses. Vanessa did not move. Mark sat back as if surprised his chair had more room than he thought. Charles found his voice first. "Let me see those." I rotated the folder toward him. He scanned the contract with the quick focus I had watched him use my entire life, looking for a foothold, a clause that could be pried open. He flipped to the permit copy, then the deposit receipt. He looked up at me over the rims of his glasses. "This is aggressive, you can pause it. Family comes first." I kept my hands steady on the table. "It is signed. Materials are ordered. Half of the labor is prepaid. The crew is scheduled for 9 months of work. It cannot be canceled." Elaine shook her head. "Sweetheart, nothing is impossible. Call them and ask for compassion. Tell them there is a family need. Good men will understand." "They are good men," I said, "and they have other families waiting for them in this calendar. I booked this window months ago. We locked the dates with a deposit because that is how schedules hold." Vanessa blinked like she had woken in the wrong room. "You planned this to keep us out." "I planned this to finish my house," I said. "I planned this before your engineer wrote his letter." She reached for the folder, then stopped short of touching it. "What exactly are they doing tomorrow?" "Removing upper cabinets, appliances, trim, and floor coverings, capping water lines, protecting windows, pulling drywall in the kitchen and down the hallway. You do not want children near that." Elaine looked from the folder to my face. "Why did you not tell us earlier?" "I told you I was renovating this year," I said. "You smiled and said how exciting. I did not know I needed to file a report with more detail." Charles set the papers down in a neat square and folded his hands. "Listen, a brief delay is reasonable. 30 days. You can pay the crew a retainer to hold their place. I can draft an addendum tonight." "I am not delaying," I said. "I saved and planned for this. I arranged every vendor and inspection. I took on extra clients to cover contingencies. I carried this alone for years. It is time." Vanessa stood abruptly, the legs of her chair scraping the floor. She pressed her palms flat on the table and leaned toward me. "You know the kids are scared in that house. You know what the engineer said. You heard me. We need this. You always said family matters." "Family matters," I said. "And so does respect." Elaine reached for Vanessa's wrist. "Sit, honey. Let us speak calmly." Vanessa sat, but she was trembling. She picked up one of the permits and stared at the seal like it had insulted her. Mark cleared his throat. "Could we look at a short-term rental near the lake while the work is underway? A month, 2. The kids would still get air and space. We would not intrude." Vanessa shot him a look, then looked back at me. "That would cost a fortune. We cannot afford that and the repair." Charles waved a hand slightly. "Rent is not the issue. We are discussing priorities. We are a family. This project can move. You have already improved the place plenty. Delay the next phase." I slid the demolition schedule back toward me and tapped the dates, each line that had been negotiated and confirmed. "They have demo booked, framing after inspection, rough plumbing, rough electrical, insulation, then drywall and finish. If I move even one piece, the rest collapses. They will go to the next client on the list, and I will lose this season. That means another winter with pipes that argue with the cold and a kitchen that breaks down every week. I have already lived that. I am not doing it again." Elaine's eyes filled and her voice went soft. "We taught you to be strong. Do not let strength turn into stubbornness. Your sister is asking for help. Those children are asking without asking. Surely you can give a few months." I gave years, I said. You were not there for the flooring that splintered or the nights the breaker tripped because the system is old. You did not lift drywall or haul tile or spend Saturday nights learning how to sweat a copper joint because a plumber could not come until Tuesday. I am not borrowing their crisis to justify leaving my work half done. Vanessa's mouth twisted and she pushed her chair back again. So that is it. You care about cabinets and tile more than your own family. It is not cabinets and tile, I said. It is a boundary. It is a plan I made for my life that does not evaporate because you announced a different plan. Charles sat straighter and used the tone that once sent junior associates to rewrite briefs. Let us cut to the heart, if I call this contractor. If I explain that your parents need a short pause for the sake of the grandchildren, you are telling me he will refuse. He will tell you to speak to his client, I said. And his client is me. I will tell him to show up at 7. He stared at me for a long moment, as if he were trying to remember who I had been when I was easier to move. Then he exhaled, and the fight in him shifted to a colder place. Elaine tried once more. What if we lived in the house while they work? We can stay in one room and keep out of the way. Vanessa seized on it. Yes, we will camp in the big room for a few weeks. The kids can handle a little dust. I shook my head. There will be open walls, exposed wiring, and nails in every board. There will be crews going in and out all day. Insurance does not allow unlisted occupants in an active site. No one is living there during demo. Vanessa pressed her knuckles to her eyes. When she looked up, they were wet and furious. You always do this. You act like the adult in the room and make the rest of us feel small. I am acting like the owner of a house under construction, I said. It is not a performance. She made a low sound, and then the anger found its words. You are betraying the whole family. The sentence hit the room like a dropped plate. The children froze. Mark stared at the table. Charles went very still. Elaine whispered Vanessa's name as if that might call her back to herself. I lifted the contract again and slid it into the folder. Then the permits, then the schedule. I aligned the stack and closed the cover. My breath felt even. My hands were steady. Tomorrow at 7, I said. Charles shook his head, a small, stiff movement. Then this conversation is not finished. It is finished for tonight, I said. I have to be up before 5. Elaine stood and began to clear plates as if action could knit the air back together. Let me pack you leftovers, she said. You will need something warm in the morning. Thank you, I said, and the gratitude was real. She moved to the kitchen, opened the familiar drawer where the foil lived, and I listened to it tear. Vanessa stayed in her chair, eyes bright and sharp. Mark reached for her hand, and she did not take it. The children asked if there would be pie, and Elaine told them another night. Charles looked like a man who had misplaced his favorite tool. I slid the folder into my bag and rose. The chair legs made a soft sound on the tile. I kissed my mother's cheek when she handed me a foil-covered plate. I told the kids I would call them this week. I told Mark good night. I looked at my father and did not say anything because there was nothing left to phrase. At the door, I paused for my coat, then stepped out into the cool Denver night. The porch light hummed. The street was quiet and the air smelled faintly of cut grass and car exhaust and the lemon oil that always followed me out of that house. I walked to my car with the plate balanced in one hand and my bag on my shoulder, unlocked the door, and set the folder on the passenger seat where I could see it in the glow from the dashboard. Chapter 4. The Moving Truck. Dawn came cold and clear, and I left Denver before the traffic could find me. The mountains were blue in the distance, and the grass along Highway 36 glinted with frost. I pulled into the drive off Gross Dam Road a little before 7, and the lake lay flat as glass below the pines. Miguel's pickup sat near the gate with a flatbed behind it and a battered gray container already chained to the spot we had marked with orange paint. The crew waved when I climbed out. Hammers and voices started up like a song I had learned by heart. Miguel walked over with a clipboard and a bright knit cap pulled low on his ears. Morning, Marissa, we will stage here. First pull is trim and upper cabinets. Then we cap water and start the kitchen walls. Do you need anything from the house before the lockout? I said. We are set. he said. Power is off at panel like we discussed. Generator is in the truck if we need it. City inspector is on for Thursday. You ready? More than ready. He nodded to the gate where the security truck rolled in behind me. 2 guards stepped out, one older with a calm face, the other young and eager. I had hired the company last week after Rachel warned me to expect a scene. The older guard introduced himself as Harris and asked for the short version. No entry except crew on the roster, I said. No exceptions. You stand here at the gate and log everyone. We will keep it tight, Harris said. The crew pulled off the front door and carried it carefully to the lawn. The hinges squealed and then went quiet. Plastic went over windows. Dust sheets unfurled. The thud of a pry bar against stubborn molding echoed through the rooms and came back out into the cold. I breathed in the smell of wood and old paint and felt my shoulders drop. A deep engine noise swelled on the road and turned into the drive without slowing. A white box truck with a rental logo came to a halt in a spray of gravel. The side door slid back before the wheels stopped and 2 movers hopped down. Glancing around for a supervisor to greet, Vanessa stepped out of the cab in black leggings and a sweater I recognized from last Christmas. She lifted her arm like a conductor. Go ahead, she called. Start with the kids' room stuff. Mattress sets to the back, boxes labeled kitchen to the left. Mark, get them the list. Mark climbed down slower, one hand to his forehead as if the altitude hurt him. He looked at Harris and then at me and then at the open rectangle where the front door used to be. Vanessa clapped her hands. Move! We are burning daylight! Harris stepped forward with his palm raised. Hold up. This property is an active construction site. No entry without authorization. Vanessa blinked. I am the sister. This is family property. It is not, I said. It is my property and it is under renovation. You cannot go in. She turned to me like I had mispronounced a simple word. This is a joke. You knew we were coming. Miguel walked up beside me and adjusted his cap. Mom, we have demolition starting now. It is not safe to be in there. My insurance will not allow unlisted people past the tape. One of the movers looked from the crew to the truck and back. So no unload. No unload, Harris said. Vanessa strode to the porch and stopped short at the threshold where painter's tape fluttered in the draft. She looked past it to the bare studs visible down the hall. A sheet of plastic snapped against the frame where a window had been opened to pass debris through. Inside. A pry bar screeched against plaster lath, and then the wall gave with a sigh. She lifted her chin. Smart locks do not scare me. I touched my phone and the system woke with a soft chime. An automated voice came from the speaker by the eaves. Unauthorized attempt detected. Site is restricted. Law enforcement will be notified if entry is forced. Vanessa laughed up at the camera. You put in a talking door. How cute. The sensor beeped faster as she reached toward the tape. Harris stepped between her and the opening without touching her. Mom, please step back behind the gate. I am going inside, she said. No, I said. She stared at me like I had used a language she refused to learn. Move. Miguel held up both hands, palms out, like he was stopping traffic. We are pulling drywall. There are exposed screws and nails. There is no floor protection down yet. You do not want to track your kids through that. Vanessa swung around to the movers. Bring the boxes. We will stack them inside the entry and sort later. The movers shifted but did not move. One of them scratched his jaw and said he needed a signature first. Mark did not offer one. He stood a little apart with his fingers pressed to his temples. Mark, Vanessa said, tell them to go. He looked at the kids' items piled by the truck door. A cardboard box flaps open to show stuffed animals and crayons and a book about a moose. He looked back at Vanessa and said nothing. A gravel crunch sounded behind us. Walter Briggs walked up from the path between our lots, a faded baseball cap on his head and a thermos in his hand. He had a way of moving that made even loud things go quiet. He took in the open door, the tape, the truck, the sweat on the crew faces. He nodded to me. Morning, Marissa. Morning, Walter. He turned to Vanessa and the movers. His voice did not rise, but it carried, This is her property. You cannot force your way in. Vanessa blinked as if she had unexpectedly entered a courtroom and lost her preferred judge. "Who are you?" "Neighbor," he said. "I watched her rebuild this place in weather you do not want to stand in. You do not push past the tape. You do not bring kids into an active site. You back up and think." Harris looked grateful and planted his feet. Vanessa pointed at the house like it might obey her. "My children need a home. My sister has a home sitting empty." "It is not empty," I said. "It is working." She turned on me. "You are doing this to punish me." "I am doing this to finish what I started." Miguel lifted his clipboard. "We have to get back to it," he said. "We lose the morning light in the kitchen if we do not get the upper cabinets out now." Vanessa stepped to the side and yelled toward the truck. "Bring me the mattress, bring the dresser, bring the boxes, bring everything, now!" The movers looked at Harris. He shook his head once. Vanessa's voice went sharp. "I hired you. I am paying you. Move." The older mover cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we cannot cross a job site boundary without permission from the owner and the site manager. We can put things on the gravel by the gate if you like." She spun back to me. "Is that what you want? Our belongings baking in the sun so you can feel important?" "I want you to stop," I said. She took a step toward me, then another, as if proximity could pry me open. The air smelled like old wood and fresh sawdust. A gust off the lake shuffled the tape in the doorway. From inside came the steady rhythm of a crowbar and the low murmur of men who know exactly what they are doing. Elaine's car turned into the drive and stopped behind the truck. She hurried up with her purse clutched tight, eyes moving from my face to Vanessa's and back again. "What is happening?" Vanessa threw her hands out. "She locked us out. She hired guards. She made the house a war zone so we cannot come in." Elaine looked at the open wall and the plastic flapping and her mouth went small. "Maybe we should wait a few days." "There are 9 months of this," I said. Charles's sedan pulled in next and parked with care as if precision could restore authority. He stepped out and took it all in, then fixed his gaze on me. "Marissa, be reasonable. We will find a way to coexist." "There is no coexistence with open studs and debris," I said. "There are codes for a reason." Vanessa made a strangled sound, and then words broke out of her like they had been trapped too long. "You are cruel, you are selfish, you want to humiliate us." Walter shook his head. "No one needs to be humiliated. You back the truck out. You make another plan. That is what grown people do." Mark finally spoke, voice low and frayed. "Vanessa, please, this is not working." She rounded on him. "Do not you start. If you had handled the contractor, we would not be here." He rubbed his forehead again and looked like a man who had run out of road. Inside the house, a section of drywall gave way with a hollow crash. Dust floated in a shaft of light and then drifted down like a curtain. Harris lifted his radio and checked in with the younger guard at the far end of the lot. Everything stayed still. Vanessa's breath hitched. Tears came fast and hot, streaking her cheeks. She looked at the movers, at Walter, at Harris, at the camera above the door that blinked its small red light. She looked at me and found no soft place to land. She screamed. It started as a word and turned into a sound. The sound rolled across the gravel and bounced off the trees and emptied out over the water. The crew paused without meaning to. A bird lifted from the nearest pine and moved farther down the shore. The children had been quiet in the cab, faces pressed to the glass, and now Lily covered her ears. Caleb's mouth rounded like he might copy the noise, and then he did not. Ethan stared at the tape in the shadowed doorway and looked older than he had yesterday. Vanessa kept yelling. She said I was breaking the family. She said I would regret this. She said everyone would see what kind of person I really was. Words burned and slipped and repeated until they lost shape. Harris did not move. Walter did not move. "Walter." I stood and let the noise pass through me and out into the trees. When her voice finally dropped to sobs, the only sound left was the soft hiss of plastic at the windows and the click of a pry bar being set down on a sill. Miguel glanced at me and I nodded. He signaled the crew back to work. The rhythm rose again, steady and unbothered. and the morning resumed its shape. Chapter 5. Furniture on the Lawn. Vanessa wiped her face with the back of her hand, turned to the movers, and jabbed a finger toward the grass by the drive. Put it all down. Everything. Right here. The older mover hesitated, then glanced at Harris. Harris did not move. The younger mover shrugged and wrestled a mattress toward the tailgate. In minutes, cardboard and duffels and a bright plastic bin of toys were sliding out. A sofa with one loose leg thumped onto the turf. A dresser with taped drawers followed. Boxes marked kitchen landed in a crooked line. And a laundry basket spilled small socks into the frost. Elaine stood to the side with her purse clutched close. Charles kept his tie straight with a thumb and watched as if witnessing a negotiation he had not authorized. Mark crouched to catch a lamp before it fell, then set it gently near a patch of dandelions. He pressed his fingers to his temples again and stayed low, like the ground steadied him. I took my phone from my pocket and scrolled to the number I had saved after a conversation with Rachel. When the dispatcher answered, I gave the address and asked for a pickup for household goods left without permission. She transferred me and a man picked up on the second ring. This is Jacobs with Clear Creek Auction. What do you have and how fast do you need it gone? Household items, I said. Beds, a sofa, dressers, boxes. They have been placed on my property without my consent. Ideally today. We can send a truck within an hour, he said. 2 men with dollies. We will photograph everything. Inventory and haul. We can sell at the weekend sale if you want. Standard consignment terms apply. Send the truck, I said. I will meet you at the gate and sign. Proceeds to be donated to the City Foster Youth Fund. You want a charity designation, he said. We do that. Bring ID. He hung up. I slid the phone back in my jacket. Harris watched me but did not ask. Walter tipped his cap forward and took a slow sip from his thermos. Vanessa saw me put the phone away. Who did you call? A junk service. Do not touch our things. You can remove them now, I said, gesturing toward the truck. Or I will remove them for you. Her voice sharpened. You touch anything, and I call the police. Call them, I said. She blinked, then pulled out her phone with shaking fingers. She paced while she explained. She said theft twice. She said minors 3 times. She raised her free hand toward the sky as if the clouds might co-sign her urgency. The movers kept unloading. They set a toddler bed on the grass and leaned a mirror against the sofa. Lily pressed her forehead to the window glass. Caleb had fallen asleep with his mouth open. Ethan watched the men work and hugged his elbows. A county cruiser turned into the drive 15 minutes later. 2 officers stepped out, one tall woman with her hair in a tight braid and a shorter man with a book of forms tucked into his vest. The woman addressed Vanessa first. Who is the homeowner? I am, I said, stepping forward with my license. Marissa Cole. This is my property. We have an active construction site with a recorded permit. These items were placed here without permission. Vanessa moved between us. She is refusing to let my family inside, and now she is stealing our belongings. The officer read my license, then looked at Harris, then at the open doorway and the tape. She spoke calmly. Mom, do you have something in writing that gives you permission to store your property here? It is my sister's house, Vanessa said. The officer looked at me. Has she been told to remove the items? Yes, I said, repeatedly. She refused. She directed the movers to dump everything on the lawn. The second officer walked the line of boxes and made notes. He took pictures with the department phone. He knelt by the sofa and touched the fabric like he was checking a patient. The woman officer turned back to Vanessa. Here is the situation. You cannot deposit goods on private property without the owner's consent. If you leave them, the owner can arrange removal. If you want to keep these items, coordinate with your movers and take them off the property now. She cannot give my things away, Vanessa said. That is theft. It becomes civil the moment you bring personal property onto land where you have no right to store it. The officer said, We are not here to enforce a family dispute. We can stand by while you retrieve your items. We cannot compel the homeowner to store them. We also cannot allow you to cross the job site boundary. Vanessa stared at her as if the uniform should bend toward her need. So you are not going to help us? We just did, the officer said. You have a truck and 2 movers. Use them. If you refuse, the homeowner can hire a haulaway. She will get a receipt. You will have to address it through civil channels if you disagree. Vanessa opened her mouth and no words came. Elaine touched her elbow. Maybe we load up, Elaine said softly. Vanessa pulled away. Mr. Jacobs arrived in a dented box truck with a logo that had seen better paint. He hopped down with 2 men in work gloves and greeted me with brisk efficiency. He asked for my license and a quick walkthrough of what was going. I pointed to everything on the grass. He nodded, took out a tablet, snapped photos from 4 angles, recorded a brief description for each piece. Vanessa stepped in front of him. You cannot take our things. Jacobs kept his voice even. I am here at the request of the property owner to remove items left on her land. You are welcome to load them back into your truck right now. If not, we will inventory and haul. There will be a receipt. Proceeds can be directed to a charity as she requested. Vanessa looked at Mark. Say something. Mark stood still for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low. Gather what you can. We should go. She stared at him like he had broken a vow only she knew about. You are choosing her. I am choosing not to make this worse, he said. She turned from him and faced the movers. Put everything back in the truck. All of it. We are leaving. The older mover scratched his jaw again. Mom, we will load what fits around what is still on board. We are booked for another job in Arvada. After that, we can come back if dispatch approves. We will do our best. They started to lift boxes back into the rental. The pile on the grass shrank a little, then stalled when the last row reached the ceiling of the truck. The sofa did not fit. The toddler bed did not fit. 4 kitchen boxes and a stack of picture frames sat in the cold. Jacobs nodded to his crew. They wrapped the sofa in a blanket and secured it to a dolly. They strapped the bed pieces together with plastic wrap and logged the number of slats. The picture frames went into a plastic bin with a snap lid. Each item got a sticker and a photo. Vanessa called out fabrications of law between sobs. You cannot touch that. You cannot move that. You cannot even look at that. The woman officer stood with her hands on her belt and watched the process with the weariness of someone who has seen the same fight staged in different houses for years. The man officer finished his notes and gave me a card with an incident number. If anyone threatens to breach the job site, call us back, he said. Otherwise, this is a civil matter. Document everything. We are documenting, Jacob said, holding up the tablet. I signed the intake form on the tablet. Jacobs confirmed the charity designation and typed in Denver Foster Youth Fund. He said they would email a consignment list by end of day and that the sale would be Saturday. He asked if I wanted a reserve on any item. I told him no. He wrote final in the notes and tapped save. The truck backed up to the pile. The crew eased each piece up the ramp with a grunt and a practiced pivot. The furniture made a hollow sound as it slid into place. The bin with the frames rattled once and then settled. The last item on the grass was a cardboard box with a child's messy handwriting that read, My Treasures. Jacobs opened it carefully, photographed the contents without touching them, then closed it and handed it to Mark. Some things are better carried by family, he said. Mark nodded and held the box like it might break. Vanessa stood in the middle of the lawn like an actress who had lost the scene partner who always fed her next line. Her mouth worked. No sound came. Her eyes found me, then slid away, then found me again. Do not pretend you are generous, she said finally. You are sending our life to strangers. I am preventing a hazard on my property, I said. You had the chance to remove it. You refused. She took a step and then another, and her knees seemed to forget what legs are for. She folded down into the grass, not graceful, not staged, a collapse that looked like gravity finding soft ground. She buried her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook. Lily cried in the cab. Caleb startled awake and began to whimper. Ethan closed his eyes. Elaine moved to kneel beside Vanessa. then hesitated and looked at me. I said nothing. Walter set his thermos on the stone wall and looked out at the water as if it could offer a sentence worth hearing. Harris spoke quietly into his radio. Jacobs closed the truck door and came over with a receipt. I signed, and he handed me a copy. He tipped his head toward the lake. "We will be out of your way in 10 minutes. "Thank you," I said. He and his crew climbed in. The truck eased down the drive and out to the road. The rental movers finished tying their load and closed the roll-up door with a bang. The engine caught. Mark put the treasure box on the passenger seat and rested his hand on it for a moment. He did not look at me. He looked at Vanessa and then at the horizon, then climbed into the cab. The cruiser pulled away. Harris returned to his post at the gate. The crew inside the house hit a new groove, and the sound of nails being pried free from old wood came steady as breathing. The air smelled like pine and plaster dust and winter sun. Vanessa stayed on the grass with her head down. Elaine hovered near her and smoothed a hand over her hair in small circles. Charles paced, then stopped, then paced again. I stood by the tape at the doorway and watched the light tilt across the floor where the kitchen had been. The studs threw long stripes against the subfloor. A breeze off the lake pushed through and carried the dust toward the open window. The space looked both ruined and honest, every line exposed, every old mistake visible and ready to be made right. Chapter 6. The Parents' Last Card. By late afternoon, the crew had cleaned their lanes, swept the subfloor, and stacked debris by the container for the morning haul. The pines threw long shadows over the drive, and the lake took on that pewter color that means the day is closing. Miguel walked the perimeter with me and pointed at the framing that would need sistering, then checked the temporary caps on the water lines. He signed the day's log and tucked his pencil behind his ear. "Good start," he said. "We will hit the hallway tomorrow and open that chase. Inspector still on for Thursday." "Thank you, Miguel." He nodded toward the road. "Do you want us to keep one guy late, just in case?" "I will be fine," I said. "Security is here until 8. After that, I lock it all down. Call if anything smells wrong." He waved to his crew, and the trucks pulled out one by one. Harris checked his clipboard, walked to the gate, and settled back on his stool with a thermos and a paperback. I stood in the kitchen shell and let the cool air move through. My phone buzzed with a message from Jacobs. Inventory lists sent. Charity designation confirmed. Sale scheduled for Saturday. I typed a quick thank you and slid the phone into my pocket. Gravel crackled on the drive. I did not need to turn to know the cadence of my parents' car. Charles always eased to a stop like he was docking a boat. Elaine opened the door before the engine died and walked fast, her purse tight against her ribs. Charles took his time, closing the sedan door with care, straightening his jacket before he approached. Elaine's eyes were wet and bright. "How could you do this?" she said. "Your sister is inconsolable. The children are beside themselves. The neighbors will talk for years. You have made us look heartless." "Elaine," Charles said, soft and warning. She pressed on. "You stood in the yard and let strangers take their things. You let the police come, you let Walter watch. This is not who we raised." I stepped to the edge of the doorway so the plastic would not catch my hair. I asked them to remove their items. They refused. The officers explained the boundary. I followed the law. That is exactly what you raised me to do. Elaine wiped at her face and looked away toward the water, as if the lake might be kinder than I was. Charles measured the room with his gaze as if he could redraw it into something that agreed with him. He stopped at the empty rectangle where the kitchen window would be. "We could have avoided this if you had bent a little," he said. "A few weeks would not break a life." "A few weeks displaces an entire schedule," I said. "It moves every subcontractor and inspection and shipment. It wastes money I earned and promises I made to myself when no one else was looking." He stepped closer. "Do not turn this into a manifesto. This is a family matter. Your sister needed you. We all needed you to consider the larger picture." Harris stood at this gate like a statue, eyes on the road, posture relaxed. The last light ran low across the lawn and collected in a shallow pool by the stone wall. Elaine found the one plank that had not been removed and put her hand on it like it might anchor her. People will say we lost our values. They will think we failed as parents. This is not about what people will say, I said. It is about what is right in my life and what is not. Charles's composure cooled. I watched him slot the next line into place. If you continue to be obstinate, if you insist on this path, we will have to reconsider the disposition of our estate. We will cut you out of the will. The word sat between us with the heavy certainty of a hammer placed deliberately on a table. He waited. He expected a flinch. He expected the old reflex. I let the breath I was holding go. My voice felt steady when it came. Poor planning on your part does not constitute an emergency on mine. Elaine blinked as if I had said something inhumane. Charles's mouth tightened. For a second, he looked like a man who had reached for a familiar tool and found it gone. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I took it out and glanced at the screen. A text from Rachel lit up. All filings clean, permit posted, contract terms solid. They have no claim to occupancy and no grounds to sue. If they try, I will file a motion to dismiss and request costs. Call if you need me to draft a letter tonight. I slid the phone back into my pocket and felt the cool rectangle settle against my palm. Rachel says everything is in order, I said. There is no legal path for what you are suggesting. Charles lifted his chin a fraction. A lawyer friend texting you at dusk is not the same as court. You are not the judge here. I am the owner here, I said. I am the one who pays the invoices and signs the permits and wakes up at 4 to make sure the crew has coffee and a clear path. I am the person responsible for the walls and the roof and the electrical that will not set our lives on fire. You taught me to respect responsibility. That is what I'm doing. Elaine's voice broke. Do you even hear yourself? You sound cold. Where is the girl who looked after her sister when she was afraid of the dark? She learned that fear does not give anyone the right to take a house, I said. Elaine let out a small sound and turned away. She stood at the threshold and stared out at the line where the pines met the lake. Charles tried again, voice lower now, each word placed like a stepping stone. You cannot build a life by closing doors on your own blood. At the end of the day, you will want a family at your table. You will want to belong. I do belong, I said. I belong to this work and to the version of myself that kept showing up when everything was heavy. I am not shutting anyone out. I am asking you to stop coming in uninvited. He moved closer, lowered his voice as if proximity might sway the facts. We can fix this. Call the crew. Postpone a week. I will write the retainer myself. No one needs to know. We will avoid more embarrassment. Embarrassment is not my metric, I said. Integrity is. Safety is. The calendar is. He searched my face for the place he used to press, and I let him look. The empty room held our voices and returned them thinner. Elaine turned back, eyes rimmed red. Please, Marissa, think of your sister as a mother. Think of the children as frightened. I do think of them, I said. I think of teaching them that adults do not take what is not theirs. That plan is not cruelty. It is a lesson I learned the hard way. Charles opened his mouth. Nothing arrived. He closed it. For a long breath, he looked not like a lawyer or a father or a man who believed he could shape outcomes with language, but like an old man standing in a frame where the room had been. The authority that usually sat on his shoulders slipped and showed its seams. Harris cleared his throat gently from the gate. Sun is down. We need to close up in 10. I am leaving, Charles said. The words clipped. He turned to go and then stopped. As if another argument might yet present itself, it did not. Elaine swiped at her face again and stepped toward me, opened her arms, then let them fall when I did not move forward quickly enough. She tried for a smile that could bridge everything. I made soup, she said. In your bag from last night. Heat it up. You will need something warm. Thank you, I said. And I meant it. She nodded, looked around as if to memorize the room she believed she had a right to, then walked back to the car. Charles paused one more time at the edge of the gravel. This conversation is not over, he said. It is for tonight. I said. They got in the sedan. The engine caught. The car rolled down the drive and turned onto the road, taillights slipping between the trees until they were gone. Harris locked the gate and gave me a small nod. You good? I am good, I said. He headed to his truck to finish the shift paperwork. The site went quiet. I walked through the rooms with a flashlight, checked the windows, tugged each temporary latch. I pulled the plastic tight where it had loosened and pressed the tape flat with my thumb. I set the thermostat to 50 and the panel to armed. Outside. The lake gathered the last of the color and went dark. On the deck I sat on the step with my feet on the cold wood and let the night settle. The pines whispered. A bird called once and then was silent. My phone buzzed again. Rachel sent a final line. Proud of you? Lock the gate? Sleep? I smiled in the dark where no one could see it. Stood. And did exactly that. Chapter 7. Public Fallout. Morning came with the clean smell of cut wood and coffee. The crew rolled in at 7, Harris logged them, and the day started with the scrape of pry bars and the steady rip of old nails letting go. I checked deliveries, signed for a pallet of insulation, and texted Miguel a photo of a cracked sill we had not planned to replace. He texted back that he would pull the measurements at lunch. By 9, my phone began to vibrate like a trapped insect. A cousin I had not heard from since a wedding sent a link to Vanessa's post. She had written 3 paragraphs and added a photo of the box truck on my lawn. The caption said her sister had thrown her family onto the street. It said the police had come. It said the auction truck had hauled away her children's memories. The last line read, "Pray for us." I watched the comments climb. A woman from church wrote that no true sister would barricade a door. Someone else wrote that I must be sick with jealousy. Then another thread began to form, slower and cleaner. A neighbor from Denver wrote that the law does not allow people to move into a construction site. An old classmate wrote that I had been fixing that house for years and that anyone who knew me knew I had planned this. Walter found his way onto the thread with a profile picture of his dog and a baseball cap and wrote a single line. She told them no. They came anyway. The police told them to leave the property alone. The comments shifted. A woman I did not recognize asked about the auction and whether the proceeds could go to a good cause. I answered from my work account so I would not get pulled into the swirl. Proceeds designated to Denver Foster Youth Fund. A few minutes later, the fund tagged the post with a thank you. The tone of the thread broke again, like a rope fraying and then snapping. People began to ask the obvious questions. Why did you arrive with a truck if you had no permission? Why did you put furniture on someone else's lawn? Why would you want children inside a space with exposed wiring? Someone posted the county renovation permit pulled from the public database with my name on it and the start date. My aunt called. She had that careful voice she used when she wanted to appear neutral. I saw some things online. Do you want to tell me your side? I scheduled a full tear-out, I said. They showed up with a moving truck. The police told them to remove their items. An auction company took the rest by my request. That is the whole side. Oh, she said. That is not how it sounded. I know. There was a silence where you could hear an older story fall apart. She cleared her throat. For what it is worth, I am proud of you for sticking to a plan. We should have seen this pattern sooner. I am sorry. Thank you, I said. By noon, the post had traveled farther than my patience. Rachel texted to remind me not to read every reply. She said she had already archived screenshots in case the narrative turned ugly in a way that mattered. I slid the phone into my back pocket and helped the crew carry out a section of old cabinets that had been glued in place sometime in the 80s. When we set them on the porch, dust floated up in a warm, golden cloud and then disappeared. Around 1. Walter walked over with a bag from the deli in town and handed me a sandwich wrapped in paper. He nodded toward the lake. You will need food if you keep working like this. Thank you, I said. I saw your comment. He shrugged. Truth does not mind daylight. I also sent the statement to the officer who took notes, in case the story grows new parts by dinner. Miguel came by with a tape measure and knelt for the sill measurement while I ate 2 bites and tried to taste anything but sawdust. We can sister this and be fine, he said. Add a couple of Simpson plates and you will sleep at night. Make me sleep at night, I said. He smiled and went back to the truck for the brackets. By mid-afternoon, I had 5 missed calls from numbers that looked like distant cousins. I answered one because the name made my chest pull in a way I did not expect. It was my mother's older sister in Oregon. She had always been kind, but had also always assumed Vanessa was the sun around which we revolved. I have been reading, she said. I thought I knew what I was reading until I read more. I'm sorry for the years we all practiced a story that put you last. Thank you, I said. That means more than you think. Come out for a weekend once the walls go back up, she said. No conversation about anything that happened, just a porch and a river. Bring your tools if it makes you feel better. I laughed and promised I would, by late afternoon. The tone online had changed in a way even Vanessa could not ignore. People were not cruel. They did not need to be. They asked specific questions and stayed with the facts. A teacher from Lily's school wrote that sending children into exposed construction is an avoidable risk. A contractor from Golden wrote that you do not cross tape because you feel like it. Someone else posted excerpts from the city's safety guidelines. The words active site appeared more than once. Several people thanked me for directing the auction proceeds to the Foster Youth Fund and tagged a list of organizations that could use donated goods year-round. The noise had turned into a kind of quiet that made Vanessa's grievances sound smaller each time she repeated them. The crew cleaned up early because the inspector had asked for an extra wide path the next morning. Miguel signed the log and loaded his guys out. Harris checked the gate and looked toward the road where a familiar sedan came into view and then kept going without turning in. He raised an eyebrow at me. Not stopping today. Not today, I said. Hey. I locked the panel and walked the perimeter, tugging plastic and tapping cardboard over the places where wind might find an edge. The air had that bright, thin quality Colorado gets before evening. I could see my breath if I exhaled hard. My phone buzzed with a text from Mark. I sat on the tailgate of my car to read it. I am leaving the house for a while, going to my mother's in Lakewood. Please do not tell Vanessa I told you. I cannot do this noise. The kids will be with her tonight. I will take them Saturday. I stared at the screen and thought about the box he had carried labeled My Treasures. I typed a plain reply. I will not say anything. I hope you find quiet. He wrote back one more line. I should have said no sooner. I put the phone away and watched a pickup crawl past on the road and then disappear. A crow called from the tallest pine. The lake held the color of the sky like a careful mirror. The door of a car opened behind me. I turned and saw Elaine step out of the passenger side of the sedan while Charles stayed behind the wheel. She walked up the drive like a woman trying to carry something slippery. May I come to the tape? She said. You can come to the tape. I said. She stopped at the blue line and looked into the skeleton of the house that would someday be rooms again. Your aunt called me, she said. She said I had made a practice of letting one child be loud and the other be useful. I said nothing. I told her she was being unkind. Then I realized she was being accurate. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope and held it out like a peace offering. I found these in a drawer. You drew the lake when you were 10. Little lines for wind. You wrote the word quiet under it. I think you knew what you were building long before any of us did. I took the envelope and felt the soft crackle of old paper. I did not open it. Thank you, I said. Vanessa is very angry, Elaine said. She put up more online. People are not clapping. I know. It is hard to watch your own story walk away, Elaine said. I am sorry we did not teach her how to hold herself up without leaning on you. Behind her. Charles looked straight ahead and did not get out of the car. Elaine followed my eyes and let out a breath. He will come around to the part of himself that listens, she said. He just does not get there quickly. Maybe, I said. She nodded and turned back toward the car. Eat something, she said, and sleep. I will. She got in. The sedan backed down the drive and turned toward the highway. The site was quiet except for a tinny rattle of plastic somewhere on the leeward side and the far-off buzz of a boat motor. Harris finished his shift notes and waved goodnight. I locked the gate and walked back toward the house, then stopped in the doorway that had no door and looked at the studs catching the last of the day. I spread a moving blanket on the subfloor in what used to be the living room and sat with my back against a beam. The light came in low and warm and slid in gold bars across the raw floor. Dust motes spun. For the first time in days, my breath dropped all the way into my belly and stayed there. I let my shoulders sink. I listened to the empty house and heard only wind and the soft click of something cooling. My chest loosened in a way that felt like the room had put a hand on it and told it to rest. Chapter 8: Freedom Reclaimed. A year later, the house carried light the way a good instrument carries sound. Morning came in soft and clean over the water and filled the rooms I had only imagined when the studs were bare. The kitchen had windows that reached for the lake and a table long enough for maps and sandwiches and hands that needed holding. The floors did not creak. The electrical panel sat in its tidy box and did not argue with the blender or the heater. In the corner where a wall used to block the view, we built a small reading nook with a deep bench and shelves that asked to be filled. I ran my palm over the wood and felt the steady patience in it. The back room became a flex space that opened to the deck. 2 afternoons a week, I set out bins of craft supplies and paperbacks and a jar of pencils with good erasers. A counselor from a foster program in Denver brought 3 or 4 kids at a time for a few hours to breathe where the trees breathe. Sometimes we read. Sometimes we fixed a birdhouse or sanded a board and stained it. Sometimes we sat quietly and let the lake do the talking when they left. The room kept their warmth the way stone keeps sun. Miguel came to the final walk-through with a grin he tried to hide. He tapped a beam and said it would outlast us both. He told me he still thought about the day the new joists went in and how the whole structure relaxed when the support was right. Rachel stopped by with a coffee and a joke about filing cabinets that hold only good news. Harris waved from the road when he passed on his way to another site. Walter brought a paper sack of peaches from a farm stand and set them on the counter like an offering. The house accepted each visit like it had been built to hold more than one kind of story. In late summer, Charles and Elaine asked if they could come by. I said yes and set out iced tea on the deck. They walked in slowly as if the boards might remember everything they had seen. Elaine looked at the reading nook first. Her hand hovered over the spines of paperback mysteries and gardening guides and dog-eared classics. She asked about the kids who came. I described a girl who drew willows, a boy who loved to label tools, a set of twins who argued about whether the lake looked more like glass or steel. Elaine listened with her eyes on the water and nodded the small nod she gives when she is trying to keep her composure. Charles stood at the threshold and looked at the line where the kitchen meets the deck. He asked about the framing and the inspection record like a man trying to speak a language that is not his own. I answered simply. He cleared his throat and said we should not have let it go so far. He said families should be bigger than a dispute about a house. He said we wanted to mend what could be mended. I told them I wanted the same thing, but not at the cost of disappearing. I told them I would not move the line I had drawn. I said this is not revenge. This is respect. I watched the sentence land without anger. Elaine let out a breath that sounded like surrender and relief mixed together. Charles put his hand flat on the deck rail and kept it there until the muscles in his forearm unclenched. We talked about small things then. A neighbor who planted sunflowers. A soup recipe that does not need cream. They left with a bag of peaches for the ride home and a promise to call before the first snow. Vanessa did not come. I knew from cousins and from the quiet way my mother phrased updates that she and Mark were living apart. He rented a small place near his mother in Lakewood and took the kids on weekends. He sent a message once in spring to say the children were doing well in school. He wrote that Lily had started a sketchbook and that Ethan wanted to learn a few basic carpentry skills. Nothing with saws yet. I offered the deck on a Saturday morning once the weather warmed. He brought them up and we built a small step stool from scrap. Caleb counted the screws. Lily labeled each piece. Ethan sanded until the wood felt like silk. When they left, Mark put his hand on the top rail and met my eyes. He did not say sorry. He did not need to. I told him to come back when the leaves turned. He said they would. The community learned to look me in the eyes without picking sides. The church lady who had written a sharp line in the first week of the fight brought a pie in a foil pan with a note that read simply for the crew. My aunt in Oregon mailed a photo of a river that looked exactly like the word quiet I had once written under a childish drawing of a lake. The foster fund sent a letter that listed what the auction proceeds had purchased that winter: sleeping bags, warm coats, a bus pass that kept a teenager from dropping out. I folded the letter and slid it behind a magnet shaped like a pine cone. In the late afternoon of the day, the last punch list item was checked. I stood on the deck and let the sun find my face. The lake lay still and heavy with light. The house behind me did not buzz or creak. It waited. I thought of the decisions that had carried me here. The drive in sleet to save a roofing window. The nights I ate cereal from a paper bowl because the kitchen was only a sketch. The morning a box truck rolled up and turned my yard into a stage, and how the truth kept its footing anyway. I felt the places where the old script had tried to write me small, and the places where I had held the pen instead. Elaine called that evening to ask how the final inspection went. I told her the inspector had smiled at the neatness of the panel and the tidy straps on the water heater. She laughed and said she would tell her friends her daughter speaks fluent code now. Charles got on the line and asked if I had kept the receipts organized. I said they were in a folder Rachel would approve of. He made the small sound he makes when pride surprises him. We did not go further back. We stayed where we could stand. As fall drew near, I hosted a quiet open house for the few people who had shown up when showing up mattered. Miguel and his crew brought a cooler of sodas and a bag of limes. Rachel set out a plate of cookies and tidied the napkins like a woman who knows order is its own kindness. Walter told the story of the first winter storm after I bought the place, and how the chimney had whistled, and how he had known I would either sell or build. He said I had built. The counselor brought two teens who wanted to see the room they had helped paint. They ran their fingers along the shelf edge and grinned. No one mentioned the scene from last year. The house did not remember it out loud. When the last guest left and the light went peach over the ridge, I walked to the end of the deck and put both hands on the rail. The water did its patient work. A hawk floated and then folded its wings and settled in a pine. I thought of the line between giving and yielding, and how thin it can be until you learn the shape of it with your whole body. I thought of the child who drew a lake and wrote the word quiet, and how she had waited for me here. I stepped down onto the flagstone and crossed to the small path that leads to the dock. The boards felt warm under my feet. I sat at the edge and watched a ripple move from nowhere to somewhere. The house behind me was not a fortress. It was a promise kept. It was proof that a woman can say no and mean yes to herself at the same time. It was the room I had been missing in my own life. If you have ever been used or dismissed, if you have ever been told that your boundaries are selfish, let this be a reminder that boundaries are a form of respect for yourself and for the life you are building. If this story gave you something to hold on to, leave a comment and tell me what part stayed with you. Tap like so it reaches someone who needs it. And subscribe if you want more stories like this. I will be here, and the lake will be here. And there will be another night when a voice in your own bones says, "This is your line and it is worth keeping."